Hello, I'm Bill Martin, welcoming you to On the Banks. On the Banks is a fraternity podcast where we meet brothers, hear their stories, and celebrate the shared values of Phi Gamma Delta. Our guest today is Theo Avgerinos, a Bucknell graduate, class of 2000. Theo is a business owner, film director, and cinematic storyteller who has directed 3 feature films. The focus of our conversation today will be the one documentary among those films called Rising Hope. Theo, it's good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me, Bill. I appreciate it.
To get started, tell us how you got into filmmaking.
Sure. It goes back to middle school for me, like a lot of, filmmakers. My dad had a Super 8 millimeter camera and an early video camera. This is going back to the 80s to date me. And I was kind of fascinated by coming home after a trip. My dad's from Greece, and so that was one of the places that he would shoot quite a bit of Super 8 film. And I found it amazing to go to the basement to spool up these reels to project these images from, a vacation that we had. And that quickly jumped going to video afterwards. And for me at the time, this is making short films with, fellow students. But I love the medium. I love experimenting with it. I love the technical aspect of trying to, make video look like old war footage. At some point, I was messing around with short films that did that. And it wasn't until high school, luckily enough, my high school had a photo and video program. And I jumped right in freshman year to that. And it was a mix of either photography, some film on 8 millimeter, but eventually I was able to shoot on 16 millimeter film, which back in high school was kind of a rare thing to be able to have access to. And so I was kind of jumping. I didn't really quite have a voice in the style of films that I was making. I just loved making whatever films I could come up with. So some were abstract shorts or just interesting things that I would do with my buddies. But then I started following this youth group that led to Rising Hope, which we can get to, and starting to do these mini documentaries about some of those trips and those mission trips we had taken. So that was kind of the start of it. I had other things I was pursuing at the time in high school and sports and what have you, but I knew I wanted to be around a camera and have some type of film making career if I could make one happen, and that's slowly but surely a lot of work paid off. But it goes back to the basement in middle school with the old cameras basically.
So your studies, your degree from Bucknell, any connection to your filmmaking aspirations there? What was
Yeah.
your major at Bucknell?
Well, interestingly enough, I created the film major at Bucknell that's there now, which was a different way of going through film school, so to speak. I originally got recruited to play football for Bucknell. I played for 1 year. It happened to be the Patriot League championship year of '96. I was a freshman, so I was more of a practice dummy than anything else. And I realized that playing all 4 years of football for me was not going to be in the cards for me. I don't think I was physically going to be able to compete the way I did in my small high school world. And so, with that new time I had, I decided to go back to the football team actually with the camera and started making NFL films types of documentaries for the team. But academically, this Bucknell had a handful of film classes that were either things like Russian cinema or English literature and film. In the theater department, I had taken a directing class of directing for theater course. And that was my freshman year. And I met another student named Jeremy Walker. He also had a similar background. He had done filmmaking in high school and was interested in kind of pursuing that more. So we teamed up and had this very bold idea that you can kind of have when you're 18, I guess, which is why don't we start a production company on campus for students to make their own films? And that led to the school's first student run film production company called Hoodwink and Hooey at the time. Don't ask me where we got the name. But we were able to raise funds from different places throughout the school. We held film festivals. We had a ton of students that got on board, and everyone played different roles in producing different shorts. And so we facilitated 3 years worth of student-run productions on campus. In the early days of digital, or the transition from analog to digital, this is the late '90s. So technically, it was very, really challenging to get anything made in that period. That at the same time was coming up on my major, choice. Like, what am I gonna, focus in? And I've discovered that you can do an interdepartmental major at campus. I forget if one of the professors I had mentioned that. And what that means is you write a proposal that you present to the school that if you bring X number of film classes under a curriculum, it's an independent major, which I created in cinema studies. And so with that, when we were seniors, interestingly enough, the recruiting process was taking place to actually have a formal film department on campus, which Professor Eric Faden was the one that came in and led. So when I left, we left a little bit of a legacy on campus with the current film department that's there.
Mm.
So I probably learned not as much technically as I would, in terms of working large movie cameras if I went to a film school, so to speak. But I kind of learned how to get things done and how to orchestrate large and difficult tasks, which probably paid off more in the world of independent filmmaking than, knowing all my gear, my lenses as much, which I eventually had to learn in the field anyway. So.
Right, right. Very good. So, of the three feature films you've directed, you describe this documentary, Rising Hope, as your passion project. So, give us a synopsis of the film Rising
Sure.
Hope.
I mean, so the official one, I'll give you, and we can expand on it, but the official one goes along the lines of, Rising Hope introduces audiences to a Mississippi Delta community where hope survives despite generational poverty. And the rest of this, I'm just going to read out what we have, just so you can hear the the web version. The documentary explores issues surrounding the state's historically oppressive policies, the massive unemployment loss following NAFTA, and the devastating effects of defunding public education for consecutive generations. But the key thing is this part. More central to the film is the vibrant tapestry of voices and personal narratives found within the Delta. So we follow a former news anchor turned church leader, a first generation college student pursuing photography, and the journeys of community nonprofits and the profound life experiences of town mayors and local citizens. So through these transformational stories, audiences bear witness to extraordinary personal hardships and their refusal to internalize the narrative of hopelessness. That's the one that we have posted. But my wife always had a better, shorter way of describing the film, and she said it's good people doing good things. And that does kind of sum it up because at the heart of it, it is following several folks that we meet in the film who worked their way through some incredible, difficult backgrounds, stories and coming from Delta and impoverished families and neighborhoods, but who made it out, so to speak, either to get these extraordinary degrees. And what they did is they came back with all that knowledge and all that
Mm.
expertise to help serve their community. And right there, I just sensed this is inspiration at a level that you can't fabricate in a script. You can't make this up and expect an audience to believe it. It's real, and if we can just get the stories right and do it with dignity, um, you know, that's what unfolded over the 5 to 6 years that we've been making the film. So.
Okay. So how did the idea for the film develop, and what about it makes it your passion project?
It started actually as a senior at Bucknell. This goes back to my hometown in Connecticut, where I grew up. We had a remarkable youth program that was run out of a local church, the Congregational Church, and this is in New Canaan, Connecticut. I'm sure a lot of the brothers know suburban Connecticut schools. And there was a pastor that came, a guy named Skip Massback, and he took this little group of 10 kids showing up for pizza on Sundays, a little get together. Your mom drops you off. Maybe you do some volunteer work locally. And he had a much bigger vision of what the youth in our town could be doing in terms of serving communities like our own, but also traveling throughout the U.S. on these annual mission trips, which were basically community building projects. Sometimes they were through Habitat for Humanity or different ones we were teaming up with. And as a young guy in high school, it's exciting. You get a bunch of other classmates, and you're going to travel, and we're going to go see places of the country that we just normally wouldn't see. And Skip had such an infectious um, charisma and enthusiasm for this type of work. And he also had an amazing career before he came to this work. He was a litigator in DC. He ran a massive law firm, and he left all that to, went to Yale Divinity School and ended up in our town on a Sunday night with five of us. Well, that group went in high school from, five or 10 kids to now it's over 200 that go on these trips annually. And in high school, like I said, I made some of those short documentary, student film highlights of our trips. In college, though, I decided instead of doing the spring break routine, to go back on and join this group and to keep documenting what I thought were incredible stories. Not so much about, of course, the point of view from us and coming from the town of New Canaan, but more about the people that we're meeting in these communities who we're working with. And one of them was a guy named Reverend Heron Wilson from Indianola, Mississippi. And that was my senior year in college. I basically decided, okay, we've done, three of these before. Let's keep going. And Indianola, Mississippi, I just knew BB King was from there. And as a fan of, guitar playing, I play a little guitar myself. That actually was kind of one of the sparks to want to go. I want to go see BB King so town. Um, so we had about, I think, 80 to 100 students on that trip. Again, mostly coming from the high school in my hometown, but then a handful of alumni as we developed an alumni program, which is now this whole group's run by alumni practically. It's broken down into 10 teams, and it's quite a story. But going to Indianola, Mississippi, I was struck by first just the poverty that's there, that unfortunately was known at the time and still is just one of the poorest parts of the nation. But there was not a poverty of spirit that I found in at least the folks that we were working with, and in particular, Reverend Heron Wilson. He just had this, again, this infectious attitude of hope and a personality and a warmth that you would look around and you're like, how do the surroundings and this personality match up? I can't quite figure it out, But that was the story of Heron and folks in the Delta, where despite all those conditions, there was a love for community. There was a dedication to try to make it just a little better for the next generation, even with this enormous kind of oppressive weight that historically has not made that easy. And I just thought like there's a film in here. I was 20 or 21 years old, and I had a short film that I made out of all this, and I had a compelling and somewhat of an emotional ending. Using some of the speeches that were given at the end of this week, because the last gathering this week was rebuilding this place called Delta Missions, which we explore in Rising Hope. Heron says this is the first time we've had the community together under one roof to celebrate and worship together, black, white, all together here. So it was marking something historic that he was telling the whole community, and I felt like to be a little part of that was an honor, and also I felt a responsibility to take whatever I learned as a filmmaker and try to give that back somehow, through the lens of what ended up being a 20-minute short film. And that film went back to our community in Connecticut, and it really brought a lot of people to tears, actually, because they realized that there's a level of struggle that we can't even conceive in suburban Connecticut for folks, but there's a level of heart and that also we can relate to, and so I figured, films are going to have the story is almost secondary to what the audience is going to connect with in their own hearts, like what struggles they. So that stuck and that impression was with me for years as I kind of was living in LA and working on other films that I never felt that, enthusiasm for a project or something until about 2017. So now we're talking 17 years later. That same group, youth group from Connecticut, was going back to the Delta. And I had finished a feature film before that and was kind of exhausted from a lot of, independent filmmaking, which grinds you down. And I just said, if there's something that we can do that sheds a good light on, our fellow citizens, our fellow Americans out there in these communities, that doesn't tell a story that's hopeless and doesn't tell one that's divisive, and all the things that media and a lot of films are really good at, and that hasn't changed, unfortunately, since then. I was like, maybe we can shed a light on a positive story. Then people can realize we actually have a lot more in common, even if you don't know anything about the Delta or haven't even been to Mississippi before. So I went back with the camera and with my cinematographer from the last movie, who Chris Lightwine, who did an amazing job over the years capturing the story with me on camera. And it started as a very short endeavor. You know, I said we're going to follow this group for 1 week. It won't be the student film, you know, that I used to kind of do when I was younger. It's going to be a little bit more mature. But I also didn't know exactly where I was going with this. I just knew I wanted to get there and follow the story. And that was the beginning of the 5 year deep dive into what Rising Hope became. Because you know, re-meeting Heron Wilson, other folks in the film that were in Shaw, Mississippi. We were in a different town not too far from Indianola. I understood that there's a much bigger story on the region, on everyone's personal lives, that I could focus on what these good nonprofits are doing and have a nice, you know, good short film that could help those folks and bring some, you know, enlighten some people about what's going on there. Or maybe we really go all out and see if there's a big film in this. And I knew that there was. I just had to discover what it was and be patient and do it again with the dignity that I thought from the beginning was paramount. I didn't want to go in and out of a community and you know, exploit their story for myself as a filmmaker or for the audiences. I wanted to sit with them in the theater whenever we showed this, and that was a long, slow process to get to where it is now, which is still not 100% done, but that's the long story of where it came from. So,
Yes. So you talked about Heron Wilson. It's
yeah,
one of the people uh, are exposed and whose work is documented
yeah,
in the film. Uh, and as you mentioned before, these are folks who are really working against some very difficult odds, tough odds, to improve their lives and or improve the lives of other people. Tell us about maybe a couple of other subjects in the film of some of the folks with really interesting stories
sure, sure,
that compelled you to say we've got to tell this story right here.
yeah. I mean, without a doubt, one would is going to be Jason Coker. Jason, I met right when I got to Shaw in 2017. And there's a more of a backstory that can unfold in the film for audiences about how we got to reconnect because actually I'd met him in 2000 when we were in
Okay.
Indianola. Jason's story took him from some very difficult circumstances in his home life growing up, and he, you know, gets to the heart of that in the film. But through all that, he ends up going to Yale Divinity School. He ends up getting these incredible degrees. At first, it was going to be a science and math degree, and he kind of had a big boomerang story where he was back in Shaw with a nonprofit that he currently runs, which the film kind of gets it explores, called Together for Hope. And Jason, being from Shaw, having this again another infectious attitude of, you know, big smile and what we can do, not what we can't do, was a guy that I immediately kind of the camera gravitated towards. And I asked Jason, and if you look around Shaw, Mississippi, and the film kind of opens up with some shots that shows a place that looks, um, I mean, you can't really even say depressed because it just looks completely abandoned and forgotten. You know, almost some, you know, we've had folks that say it looks like almost like war torn. You know, the buildings are kind of emptied out and are fallen. And then you meet Jason and Cora is someone else that we'll get to. And Jason's work in Together for Hope is addressing the systemic challenges in persistent rural poverty, starting with his hometown and his county, but now he's travels, you know, a bit of the nation to 349 counties of persistent rural poverty. So this is his full-time work, is to figure out how to bring communities and just get them above water a bit in different categories. But the way he did it, the way he described how he's pursuing this was quite uh, illuminating to me because he said, I said, how do you, you know, work with a community that has apparently, you know, so little, you know, and it's depressing, right? You see this. He goes, we don't start with that. He goes, we have this thing called assets mapping. And I said, okay, what's that? Sounds like a kind of a nonprofit tech term, you know? And he explained with Cora in his town that we meet, he goes, we get the community together and the first thing that we do is we get these huge poster boards up on the wall. And as we start figuring out what can Together for Hope or what the community can work towards, we ask everyone, what are your assets? What are your strengths, basically? And everyone starts listing out different things. We have a building that's abandoned that could be used for, the youth after school. We have a retired teacher that we know that she wants to, volunteer. And he says after, 20 minutes of putting up all these assets up on a board, everyone gets to look up and see what they do have versus what they don't have. And I said, how does that, how does that, your audience, your community must resonate. He goes, it's the game changing way of looking about anything that we do. If you look at what you don't have, you just kind of go down a very sad, depressing rabbit hole, right? Which everyone knows what that looks like. If you look at your strengths, it's a game changer. And that motivates from the community within to figure out how can they take advantage of what they do have, the assets. And that blew me away. Just that concept, which seems fairly simple, the way he described it, but what it means, I thought was way beyond Shaw and way beyond the communities like Shaw. This is something that goes to the core of what it is to struggle for all of us and any one of our struggles. And it's comes back to, being grateful for what you have, but also taking what you have and making something out of it. And doesn't downplay all the things that are missing and that are wrong and the policies that we get into. It doesn't, but it emotionally kind of regrounds what you're up to. And I thought from Jason's story and to see his eyes kind of light up and to him talk about what they're doing, is like he's the real deal, another real deal guy committed to this. I was like, I got to get this right. Audiences have to know about these folks. So that's Jason Coker. Yeah.
Yeah, I got to get this right.
Yeah.
I would think that, and you've just alluded to one with Jason and what he showed you about starting with the positive, building on the positive. I would think there were multiple experiences over the course of filming that reinforced for you that this project, reinforced your decision to pursue this and that these stories needed to be told. Was there another story or experience within the filming that did that for you? Just kind of an inspirational moment that filled your heart or said, "Wow, this is what I'm meant to be doing today."
Yeah. Well, food in the Delta and the cooking from Joe and Cora, who you meet in the film, that was definitely one of the joys of the community that we formed between myself and some of the small crew that we had over the years. I would say probably the part that really made me think we're on the right track was we had a couple of rough cuts of the film over the years as it evolved, right? And Cora and Joe Jackson are folks in the film that they play a huge role in Shaw. They live in Shaw. They're there. They're from Shaw. And they also had a very interesting impact on Jason's life when Jason was a kid, helping Jason out in some really tough situations at home. Um, and I always knew I had to figure out how can I get Joe and Cora to share their story, because it's so instrumental to folks that are in Shaw now, and have this connection with Jason, what have you. But there was probably hesitation, for a little while on that. Who am I to come in and start telling everyone stories? Jason's the front of a nonprofit. He's a great storyteller, and he's happy to share that. But Cora and Joe don't have any obligation to do so. And so I just, was hoping they could see a cut of the film to get an idea of what we were up to. And they saw an edit and realized that we were putting the story of the folks in the film and their dignity as at the top. And I said to Cora and Joe, however you guys want to tell your story, let me know. And anything you're not, interested or uncomfortable seeing, I'm going to show you the film. You don't feel like we're not going anywhere. We're here together. And that really one of the last shoots that we were there ended up being their story because Cora and Joe said like we'll tell you a little bit more about who we are. And right there, I knew there was something special going on here because earning someone's trust to tell a deeply personal story is not easy. But they ended up being one of the grounding narratives in the film, and it's an amazing love story as well. And Cora's story, I don't want to give too much away for folks, but it is there was a low part that you felt like, how do you get out of this? And there's a turnaround that is quite moving that she shared with all of us. And she's been one of our best ambassadors with Joe and Jason along the way. But Cora's been to almost every screening we've had at film festivals, at different communities. And that is the real joy, that I get to sit back, maybe answer some questions for the audience as the filmmaker, but I want to turn it back and give it the mic to Cora and the folks who were there and let them explain more about what their story means and what it means for them to get it out to
Yeah.
audiences.
Yes.
So
Yeah. Very good. Well, and there was something that I read in looking at this might have been from your Bucknell showing of the film, but a quote from Dr. Jackson, who I think is interviewed in
yes,
your.
that's Cora, Dr. Jackson. Yep.
Okay, all right. I lost track of that.
Yeah, yeah.
But she said to the reporter who was interviewing her, Theo and his crew promised to tell our stories. They were going to present the information with as much dignity and respect as they could.
Mm,
So dignity and respect is kind of a theme that runs through this film also.
absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
you captured it.
Yeah.
So what is your hope for Rising Hope? What impact do you hope that it has?
Sure. I mean, if we look at where we're at with the film now, and if that, we had a great festival run in the past year with the feature length version of the film, the one that played also at Bucknell last year. And we're kind of now looking towards how to get this out to audiences, possibly as a docu-series, right? So the festival run, we had a couple of wonderful awards, which was really nice to get recognized. The opening screening, the premiere was um, in last was it March? I want to right. We had it in Oxford, Mississippi, for their film festival, and we won the best Mississippi film and the audience award. And that carried on to a couple other smaller festivals, but it was again we were winning either best documentary, a best director, which was nice to have. I got one of those, and again, anytime we got something, I was like, this is for the Delta. This is their film. So we've also had a handful of community screenings, and we'll continue to do more of those. And those, like festivals, are always important because there's a dialogue afterwards, where folks can ask questions and also get to the heart of like what can they do, where heck, and is there ways that they can either help their community or the film, because there's a parallel in the story that Rising Hope tells in the Delta that is both inspiring and sad at the same time, that these are communities that are across the country, and there are conditions that people's accents and some of the cultural bits might be a little different, but there's a common struggle that's happening in all these counties. So we've had some really inspiring and also some gut-wrenching feedback after films that have screened, and people have talked about their lives and what they've gone through, but what the film meant to them, that it was recognizing that this struggle is here and that there's a lot of forgotten towns that we don't need to forget about. These are choices we have. So where we're going at the moment is we're recutting the film one last time. We are going to be fundraising, so if anyone we can get to, helping us out, risinghopefilm.com. We have a place that folks want to support. Everything in movie making costs a lot of money every step of the way. But the goal is to take the feature length version that we have now and to break it up into 2 or 3 parts, and to create that smaller docu-series part, that just the way we all consume, content these days, much more likely you're going to finish, 3 30-minute episodes than you might watch one 90-minute film. And I have no problem with that, recutting it. So we're going to try to give it our best chance to recut it and see where we can land distribution for the film. What the film could do for a place like Shaw and the Delta is certainly a priority. Folks that are inspired, and maybe that's just giving, maybe that's coming and visiting. Because a lot of this is the human interaction, the heart chance for other people from anywhere in the U.S., even outside the U.S., to come and meet people like Joe and Cora and Heron. That's huge. There's an explosive energy that you get from that resonates out. And you go back to your community, wherever that is, and you have another understanding of what our country really looks like as a whole, and maybe what you could do. So to inspire the audience to, to help is one thing, but I'd say really to inspire the audience to look at what they can do in their own town and where they can be an asset, where they can be, and you don't need to follow any politics or religion for that. Like everyone can help, everyone can give back. That doesn't, there's no rules against that. And I think we all know that collectively. I think I was lucky to grow up with parents that worked really hard in our community and gave back just as a default. I mean, scouting was a part of it. Getting to Fiji, of course, and the work we did there. Even our football team was, we had volunteer bits. There was a sense of civic duty that just came with the territory. You're going to get something by growing up in a community like that. You better give something back. And I think for younger audiences, especially ones if we're talking to Fiji's, is there's a lot you can do. You don't have to. It doesn't have to be giving financially. There's a part that plays. It plays a huge role in a lot of things. But giving of your time, giving of your experience, giving of what doesn't take much. I had a grandmother I remember growing up who was always involved with her church in her towns. And when I was younger, she would take me to do Meals on Wheels. And I would kind of feel a little awkward, and I'd say, "Okay, Grandma, but I'm going to go take this meal and drop it off to some stranger's home." And she goes, "Yeah, go up and knock on the door, and you give." So I went up to the first door. I remember I kind of knocked. I put the meal down there, and I kind of walked away. She goes, "What are you doing?" I said, "I delivered the meal." That's it. She goes, "No, the meal is secondary. You have to you talk to the person who's at the door." I said, "What? I thought I was just delivering the meal." She goes, "No, no," and I didn't get it. It clicked for me that the actual interaction, the couple minutes of just saying, "Hi, how are you?" and seeing that person smile. I said, "I think that's what she's talking about. The meal is
Sure.
is secondary. It's that interaction."
Exactly.
So the story in the film that we all see, these different amazing inspirational tales like that, you got to take that home with you and figure out how you can do. So that's one big goal for sure at the end of the day. And the second one, I'd say, just from a film perspective, there's an opportunity to tell this story as a series throughout the U.S., which I'm working towards. I'm not quite there yet with the structure of how that would unpack, but you can see quickly if you see Rising Hope Mississippi that this could be in a lot of different states and regions of the U.S. where you have these folks on the ground doing incredible work who've gone through unbelievable hardship, but have come out, with the glass half full, and that hope, leading the charge there. So the dream would be to be able to keep telling this story and telling stories like the ones we told in the Delta throughout the U.S. So
Yep. Yep. Got it. If listeners want to get more information about Rising Hope, what should they do, and are there ways that they can help promote it?
yeah, risinghopefilm.com. That's currently our website where we're kind of, hosting everything. There's some social media that we're growing soon. So that'll be, again, the handles at Rising Hope Film, Instagram and Facebook. When the film is rolled out, when we have an official kind of release, sharing that, the word of mouth for a project like this is enormous. I mean, I think we're going to rely on a lot of that because it's very expensive to market movies. And that's, having people share it with friends and family and see where it goes will be a big part. But also, if anyone is interested in donating, we have a lot of costs left to finish the film and get it into a distributor's hands. So on the website, there is a place that folks can donate.
Mhm.
And a little bit goes a long way. We have also some found people that may have associations with foundations and places that are obligated to give at the end of the year.
Yes.
And if they would like to see a preview of the film because they're motivated to share a more substantial amount, I'm happy to share a link. So yeah, I think those would be the two ways certainly to help get it out there, and also screenings in communities and towns. We were happy to go. We travel with the film. So far we've done a handful of schools. So it could be anything, any community or a nonprofit or a church or a school. It doesn't make a difference. If someone wants to host a screening and have a dialogue, we'd love to come and show it. So.
Very good. Very good. So, for one last question, let's come back to Phi Gamma Delta. What are some things you learned in the Delta chapter at Bucknell that have influenced you or helped you in your postgraduate life? Not necessarily career or work, but just in your life. What are some things you learned from that undergraduate experience in the Delta chapter?
One thing, I had a fellow brother a year above me. He said something to me when we were pledging, and he says, "You're going to learn a lot about how people work, and how they operate." And I didn't quite get what he was getting at until maybe my junior and senior year, trying to wrangle, brothers of all different backgrounds and across 3 different years, to get on the same page for certain things, to wrangle people together, to see how people operate, and to try to work towards something common. That was the first taste of like, okay, this is more challenging than just, here's what we're doing, follow the script, everyone. So I'd say just getting to know how people, their perspectives, where they're coming from, what they want to do, what motivates them, what doesn't, is a part of it that played out. The other thing I think, and this is something that I would certainly share with any younger Fijis who are there, there's a great sense of being a part of something bigger than yourself when you're part of an organization like Fiji, and that's a special feeling. And I'm not sure how to articulate that any better, but if you have if you're part of a bigger history and part of something that's going to be, hopefully long around after we're, gone, and it's been around for you have an obligation, I think, to take those lessons and, of course, give back to Fiji where you can in your school, but going back to your community, the sense of civic duty. It's to be able to go to a great university anywhere in this U.S. in the country, and to go to a fraternity and to have that type of support. That's a gift, and you're part of something bigger than yourself. So I hope for me, it felt like that was a direction that I like to have in life, to know that there's a couple of groups. Because when you get out on your own, when you're in your 20s, especially, like, all these things cut off very quickly, right? I mean, you go, high school, college, you've had associations, teams, and then you find yourself with like, no, I'm just working and in society. And a lot of young folks I've talked to over the years, there's a sense of being lost with that. And I think with Fiji, you get a sense of, no, you have a family. You've got something to steer back towards. There is kind of a compass and a lighthouse for where you could play a role. So, yeah, for me, being part of something bigger than myself, I guess, is makes it special.
Understood. Yes. Well, those are important lessons that I expect a lot of brothers could say amen to
Yeah.
that, as in terms of their experience and what they learned as well. Very
Yeah.
important. So you mentioned Indianola earlier. I'm from the Mississippi Delta. I was born about 25 miles from Indianola, and I know where Shaw is. And there
Yep.
are lots of towns in the Mississippi Delta, just like Shaw, that one of the towns that I lived in growing up that has just dried
Yeah.
up, similar to Shaw. So I want to thank you as a native of the Delta. I want to thank you for focusing your storytelling talent and your passion on these stories that are so important to be told. Good luck as you
Thank you. Thank
continue
you, Bill.
to promote Rising Hope. Our society can only be improved by having more people see that and be inspired by it. So I want to thank you for doing that. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Bill. I really appreciate the time. So,
You're welcome. There are many other interesting stories in Fiji land. Please join us again for another segment of On the Banks, where we meet brothers and share their stories. Until next time, I'm mighty proud to be a Fiji.